Welcome to the Mind Myself podcast. I'm Esther, and it is my pleasure to be bringing you information about healthcare approaches, health issues, and people's health journey stories, all from the complementary, holistic, and integrative perspectives, helping you become your own best health advocate and helping you make your own informed choices because you matter. Welcome back to Conversations with E. I'm Esther, and I again have the pleasure of welcoming Sandra Lee to our podcast. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Excellent. So, Sandra, just remind us of your credentials. Again, we're talking about food. This is part 2 of our food series, and we're just scratching the surface of some of the main issues around food and health. But tell us a little bit about your credentials, and then let's dive in.
I've been a massage therapist for 30 years, really helping people to be healthy, happy, and helping them understand why they develop the pains and the symptoms they do. And part of that education process for my clients is often about food and why choosing food in the ways that we think is healthy is a value.
Excellent. And you have some certification in food science as well?
I have been a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, which helps people evaluate their health from the perspective of labs and tests and things like that.
Awesome. So you come from a very informed place, and we're really glad to have you here. Thank you. So just a refresher for those who might not have seen episode 1. In episode 1, we talked about why is food important and what are the foundations of food and what is the difference between organic and not organic, and what are some really clear, specific things you can do without changing everything all at once and getting overwhelmed. So one thing at a time. What can you add without changing anything else? And so today for this topic, we're going to dive into something that's maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but I think we really do need to talk about what is a genetically modified organism or genetically GMO food, and why is that so important for us to know about and consider as we eat?
So genetically modified food is the way scientists take a plant that is susceptible to susceptible to pests or to weeds or to some other thing for more complications. But they want to take a plant that is susceptible to these, whatever it is that's the threat, and protect it from that threat so that it's easier and more commercially viable, supposedly, for the farmer to produce this food with more ease, basically. So
and does it work? Does it work?
That's a really complicated question. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So there are, in the old original form of genetically modified food, there's 2 main ways that they genetically modified. One was to protect against pesticides by applying herbicides. And I think everybody has heard of the herbicide Roundup. Roundup is the first pesticide, the first herbicide that was used to be able to spray on plants and protect from needing to deal with weeds. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a minute. The other form was to protect from insects. Okay, so we have technologies that are built around, very complex technologies that are built around this. So let's talk about, how much do you want to know? You want to know all this?
Yeah, let's dive in, and then let's bring it to the practical level of what do we do in a grocery store and how do we know and how does this affect us? But let's keep going on this path.
Okay, so they found there was a mold that somehow made it so plants were resistant to the application of Roundup. Roundup is an herbicide. And they wound up spraying these plants with the herbicide, and the plants didn't die. I was like, what happened? And they figured out, I think it was a mold, that somehow the plants had incorporated, been exposed to this, that made them resistant to the application of the herbicide. The plants didn't die. And so they used science, genetic modification, to somehow or other identify the genetic sequence that conveyed this lack of susceptibility to Roundup. And they managed to add it into the DNA of the plant, say corn plant. Okay. So the way they do that is very complicated. It's like lab stuff that we don't really need to, don't need to explain. Okay. So the process of putting that genetic modification in and finding out which one of the cells then produced a plant that produced viable corn, like an ear of corn. Okay, so they have thousands and thousands and thousands of experiments they do producing one corn plant that is resistant to the application of Roundup. That's the process of genetic modification. Okay, the other one is to resist the corn borer, a bug, an insect that bores into the corn and destroys the corn for commercial purposes. Okay, so they have Bt toxin is a pesticide that is considered acceptable by organic standards. Bt toxin is considered acceptable. It's considered safe. And when they spray the Bt toxin on the plants, they become resistant to the bugs. So they wanted to make it so the plant actually makes the Bt toxin by itself. How do we do that? We figure out how to take the ability to make the Bt and incorporate it into the DNA of the corn so that when the corn grows, every molecule of the corn has this Bt toxin in it because the plant is generated by itself. So those are the primary. Yes?
And what are the implications for us? If those are the two primary GMOs that they've been doing, and you're using corn as the example, so what impact does that have on us then if we ingest the corn or any other GMO product?
Yes. The process of genetic modification inherently generates errors. It's like, say we have a cell with its DNA and we are just shooting this stuff at it and hoping that the stuff, the DNA that I am shooting at it, gets incorporated into the cellular DNA. And on the rare occasion that that actually works, that then produces some that become plants, that produce fruit. Okay, that's the process of genetic modification. But the process of shooting this plate of cells with this thing causes genetic errors beyond just taking the DNA segment that I want to include and inserting it into the DNA. It can cause scrambling of the DNA. It can cause things that should be made to make extra. It can cause things that should be made to not be made. It can rearrange the letter. So DNA has A, T, C's, and G's. Those are the amino acids that are made into DNA. Okay, so imagine I take a book. What happens if I scramble the letters of my book?
It's pretty hard to read.
It's hard to read. Okay, that's what happens with the DNA of this corn plant. I scramble it, and I scramble it in random ways, right? The process of genetic modification could have created like 2,000 errors, for example, in the DNA of the corn plant. And only the ones that are genetically modified in such a way that it still produces a viable corn plant that is resistant to the application of Roundup, those are the only ones that they actually produce and use to produce food. But there's still all those genetic errors that are produced. So what happens when we eat that? It's not natural food. There's all kinds of genetic errors in there that aren't manifesting as actual like changes to the corn plant. There's a story about that. There was one, basically say there's like 5 different varieties of genetically modified corn. I don't know how many there are, but say there was like 5 varieties of genetically modified corn, and one of them had a particular error that produced corn that was made into tortillas that killed people. The people actually died, and they traced it back to eating this corn.
This is a real story.
This is a real story. Okay, so how did they figure out that that was the case? The only way they are going to be able to identify a specific food product led to all these illnesses and deaths is if it caused a really dramatic symptom, and that within a certain period of time. In other words, they were able to identify this source. You know, all these people all over the country ate these tortillas. Where did they come from? They came from this place. Where did the corn come from? Right? So they have to be able to track it all the way back. But it's very rare for the long-term consequences, the ultimate consequences, to be that clearly identifiable.
Right.
So since this whole genetic modification thing proliferated, we've had, you know, dramatic increases in heart disease, dramatic increases in diabetes and obesity, dramatic increases in cancer, all sorts of different health conditions have escalated since the introduction of the genetically modified food. But because we can't say this corn produced these tortillas that made all these people die, it's not that clear and trackable. Because genetically modified corn, genetically modified soy, genetically modified sugar beets, canola are in all of the processed food. Everybody's eating them. And so it's contributing to declining health for everyone who eats those foods. And they're considered staple crops.
Right. So let's not even get into the politics of farming and crops and monocrops and more commercial viability and increased profits. Let's not even go into that conversation. So it's like there's been this in North America anyway. I can't comment on Europe. I don't think there are as many GMO foods allowed there. But certainly in North America, in the US and in Canada, and I imagine that in South America too, we have a proliferation of genetically modified foods starting about when? Would you say that this has been happening on a large scale?
I should have done research. I don't remember. I think it was the 1990s, 1996, I want to say, around then.
Okay, so since the 1990s, there's just been like this proliferation of GMO foods, and governments are clearly saying, oh, it's fine, because there's the FDA and whatever the Canadian versions of that organization is. And it's everywhere in our grocery stores, and they've been fighting about putting labels on things, whether or not they have to label something as genetically modified. And I think we're a few years away still from having foods required to be labeled genetically modified or not. So, and we can't make the clear association with all these diseases that you're talking about, but there's a suggestion, or there's an implication, or there's a theory that these foods are related to the massive increase in certain illnesses in our society. That's what I'm hearing you say, yes?
Yeah, there is a relatively trackable way to measure this. So one of the common issues that is coming up for people is autism spectrum disorders.
Yes.
And they have done some studies where they show that when people who have these disorders, when they clean their diet up, they get so much better.
Clean their diet up means exactly what are you talking about?
Meaning eliminating all of the genetically modified foods, which we'll talk about the varieties and what they are. And then that winds up being going organic. Because certified organic foods, packaged foods that say certified organic, are not supposed to have any genetically modified ingredients in them. So if you want to avoid genetically modified ingredients, an easier way to do that is to just not buy anything that is certified, well, to buy certified organic.
Okay, and let's say you know a farm that is doing organic practices and has organic seeds and is not buying into the GMO philosophy or processes, but they just can't afford the certification. What's your comment on that?
I would say that's probably not going to be the case for the genetically modified foods. In other words, it's usually commodities that this becomes an issue with. You know, talking about organic and not organic in a non-genetically modified arena, when we're talking about produce, for example, right? That's where it's like, if you talk to the farmer and you know that they don't spray their vegetables, then you're going to be okay.
Okay, good. So certified organic is the standard, but if you're at a farmer's market or you're talking directly to farmers, you can ask those questions. And if they're a small farm and you want to support them and they just can't afford that expensive certification process, it's okay still to go down that path.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Now, let's talk about what foods are genetically modified. Okay. The most common ones are soy, corn, canola, sugar beet, cotton and cottonseed. Alfalfa, unfortunately, now is genetically modified. Zucchini and crookneck squash, small amounts of that. So those are the main genetically modified crops. The old genetically modified crops, I think they might have some genetically modified salmon now. There might be some genetically modified others, but those are the ones that I know about. But years ago, I did some training in giving presentations about genetically modified food. So at that time, all of those initial ones were the ones that I just named. Anything since then, I don't know about.
Right, but the general presupposition you can use if you're in a grocery store, if it isn't labeled organic, chances are it's got, in our current modern age in 2022, that's when we're recording this, it's probably got genetic modifications in it if it's not listed as organic. Would you say that's true, or would you challenge?
There is a certification for GMO free.
Okay.
So the Institute for Responsible Technology, headed by Jeffrey Smith, he's the recognized expert in genetically modified food. Okay, they have a certification process that a manufactured food company can take individual products and test them and show that they are free from genetically modified ingredients, even if they're not certified organic. So there is a label, a GMO-free label that you can see on packages, and I read for that all of the time. So they might not necessarily have gone to the effort of becoming certified organic, but they are showing that they are free from the genetically modified ingredients.
Excellent. So there are varieties and there are stages of this. So if you can't afford fully organic food, all of it, look for that GMO-free label, and that's a good place to start.
Now, when you go to your stores and you ask for GMO-free, right, you are letting your store know that this is something you care about. So part of what has these products become available is demand. How you choose to spend your dollars creates the demand. So if you tell your grocery store owner, hey, I care about this, I want more organic options, GMO-free really matters to me. So then your store owner will know, oh, we have people who care about this. Tell your neighbors, right? Go to the store and say, do you have GMO-free, organic?
Got it. So what if someone's still listening, and maybe they wouldn't if they disagree with this, but someone's still listening at this point in the podcast and saying, I don't know, okay, I know you've got your credentials and you've been given lectures on this, but what's the science? How do I know I can trust you? I mean, the government has said this is safe. Our grocery stores are full of food that is genetically modified, and I've been fine. And we'll close with this on this episode today, but what would you tell our listener today and say, okay, but here's the thing?
I would say go do some research. Check out the information from the Institute for Responsible Technology. They have several books and they have videos, and you can do some searching on the internet and get videos of people talking about what difference it made when they went organic with their food, or animals. So they feed a lot of these genetically modified crops to livestock, and they have had cows, pigs, for example, stop being able to breed, like they miscarry when they get pregnant and then they miscarry when they're feeding them these genetically modified crops. And they find that when they get rid of the genetically modified crops and start feeding their livestock organic grain, because they're usually feeding them soy and corn, right? So when they switch to organic grain, then poof, they're suddenly able to reproduce again. I don't know if that's necessarily science, but it's evidence showing that when you have one thing that you're eating, this is what happens. And when you change it, this happens, it changes.
Right. Wow. Another action-packed discussion about food. And in this case, a lot of discussion around genetically modified food. So in our next episode, we are going to talk about nutrients and fats and oils and sugar, fat, salt, that kind of a conversation, because there's been so much controversy over the last number of decades about that. And I think we may have been lied to about some things. So I'm very curious as to what Sandra will have to say about the next discussion on foods for us. Thank you, Sandra, for being here. And thank you for watching.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us at the Mind Myself podcast today. We know that time is precious and you've spent some of your valuable time with us. We're grateful. If you would like to reach out to our guests directly, the information is below. And if you would like more from Mind Myself, that information is also below. Please visit our website and check out all the information about the different complementary, holistic, and integrative healthcare approaches, information about health issues, more podcasts, tons of blogs, and we even have a community page for you where you could reach out and tell your story safely, or you could ask questions and perhaps somebody else in the world is going through something similar to you. In any case, we're so glad you're with us, and we're doing this because you matter.